the meeting is yours.
Okay, great. Let me pull my agenda, disappeared for a moment here, so pardon me. Happens every time.
Hi, how are you? I'm good. Just wanted to say hi to you. I think they want a treat. Do you want a treat? Oh my gosh, should we get a treat?
If it's helpful, Commissioner, our first up is our Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, I found it. Okay, got it. Okay, well, welcome everyone to our C4 meeting on May 5th, Cinco de Mayo Day. Well, if you'll all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First up, well, I tell you, here we go. First up is welcome, and I guess we have a few new members, and we'll introduce our guest in a little while, but Trent, could you introduce our new members?
Hi, thank you. So we've had a vacancy in C4 for our water seat for almost a year now after the passing of Hugh Kalani from Clackamas River Water. Hugh had served on C4 for as long as I've worked on C4, and before that, I'm sure. So it was a big loss to this group, and it took some time to fill those shoes, but really want to send my regards to the water districts. They've all of them considered who might be interested in serving, and ultimately 2 names came forward. And so I'm pleased to introduce Jim Johnson from the River Grove Water District, as well as Sherry French from the Clackamas River Water District as well, who will be serving as the alternate. Jim and Sherry, would you please introduce yourself, say a few things, and meet the new group?
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Johnson. I'm a board member of the River Grove Water District. I live in the unincorporated Lake Oswego area, the River Grove area. Some of you may know me from my vocation. I'm a land use planner with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And I'm also an elected board member of the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District. Thank you for welcoming me.
Okay, I'm Sherry French from Clackamas River Water. I've been on their budget committee and on their board, and I've been secretary, and this is my 3rd year of being board president, along with being vice chair of CRWSC, among other things. And we had our little meeting to pick the person to fill Hugh's shoes, which ended up being by a coin toss. But I hope to at least, although I know you talk a lot about transportation and housing, but water is also an important part of that if you put it all in a package. So I'm hoping that we can kind of all incorporate that in together and make Clackamas County a greater place to live. I'll put that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Paul Savas. I'm one of the co-chairs. The other co-chair is Mayor Brian Hodson, who is from Canby. He is not with us tonight, though I expect him. So if he pops in, we'll make sure that we recognize that he's joined us. Sherry, to your point, I just want to give a brief, because you're both new. Just want to give a brief overview, and it'll be brief, on how C4 works. We're in our 21st year. We have 1 representative, a voting member from every city in Clackamas County that chooses to participate. And we also have 1 voting representative from water districts, to your point, to transit districts, to sanitary sewer districts, if there are any individual ones. And I'm leaving off 1. Trent, who am I missing?
Fire districts.
Fire, yes, thank you. And ours is also our fire districts. We also have representatives from the CPOs, 1 voting representative that represents all, and the hamlets and or villages. We don't have any villages today, but we do have hamlets. So, and we also have some ex officio seats. We have an ex officio seat from the Port of Portland. I don't think they're here tonight. Metro, Councilor Christine Lewis is joining us tonight. Thank you, Christine. And Ed Gronke is our MPAC. He's also ex officio. He's our MPAC representative. So C4 has been pretty much based on land use and transportation, and we've kind of expanded a little bit in this regard. And if we could just identify how it works and how we set the agenda is based on an executive committee. So it's not any one doing or the county. And so there's one representative from the county, in this case, myself as the appointed person from the county. The city, the rural cities select, or all the cities select, well, I take that back. There's a rural representative on the executive committee from the cities. There is a urban city representative that the cities select at the executive committee. One for water, one for fire, and one for sanitary. So those 5 makeups kind of represent the whole thing, and we all vote basically to figure out who, not vote, but we also organize under Trent's leadership to set the agenda, make sure and touch back with this group all the time to make sure our agenda setting is what you all want on the agenda versus what anyone else particularly wants. So our retreat is, we try to do a retreat every year, and we do that retreat to kind of identify what our agenda setting is going to be, or our direction, our vision for the next year. And we spend, the exec committee meets after C4, a week or so after, just again, focused on trying to meet that agenda or agenda setting based on those desires of the committee as things go and issues arise. So with that, I'm going to, you've all had introductions for our new guest. I'm looking at the agenda. So housekeeping, I guess we have some minutes. Is there, and we did our welcome already. So is there a motion to approve the minutes, or are there any amendments to the minutes? See, no, was someone proffer a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, been moved by Councilor Heisey and seconded by Councilor Sherman. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye or wave your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Anyone opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. So our next, our main feature for this evening is an update on research justice study of Clackamas County with the Coalition of Communities of Color. And I know that we have Martine here and Trent, our staff, to help lead this. So Trent, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our guest.
Thank you. And I have the privilege of turning it over to Martine, our Equity and Inclusion Officer, who is our lead and champion in this regard at Clackamas County. I'm sure many of you have met Martine in the past. Actually, side note, Martine has facilitated one of our C4 retreats in the past. So Martine has come full circle to now presenting at C4. And we're pleased to have her and the Coalition for Communities of Color to come present today as well. It's been a great privilege of mine to work with them to get to this point. And I know that they're working with all of your cities as well. So this is a long time coming, and looking forward to how this conversation helps all of your jurisdictions as well as Clackamas County, as well as how it can help C4 move some collaborative policies forward. So Martine.
Thank you so much, Trent, and thank you, Commissioner Savas. My name is Martine Koblenz. I use she, her pronouns, and as they said, I'm the Equity and Inclusion Officer for Clackamas County, and it's good to see some familiar faces. I will not spend a lot of time, but I wanted to just really thank you all for giving us the opportunity to give you an update on the research justice work that the Coalition of Communities of Color is doing for our county. And many of you all contributed to this project. So I also want to just again thank you for your investment. And I really look forward to hearing their presentation, and more so look forward to hearing the questions that you have or the thoughts that you might have, and having a rich discussion afterwards. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Lopez, Dr. Mossini, and Kanya Mzivi, and they will give a presentation on what they have been doing so far for our research justice work. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Andres.
Thank you, Martine. Thank you, Trent. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to share with you all and share space with you this hour. We'll begin with just a little bit of introductions before we jump into the slide, just because we like to share a little bit more about who we are. So my name is Dr. Andres Lopez, and I use he and him pronouns, and I'm the research director at the coalition. I'm a trained sociologist, so a lot of my academic research focuses on how inequalities operate in organizational settings along the lines of race, gender, and sexuality. So I studied work inequalities and religious organizational inequalities. So that's kind of some of my my nerdy academic background self. Throughout my trajectory of getting my degree, I also did about 10 years of applied research. So I was really fortunate to work across sectors with governments and nonprofits and school boards and you name it, really doing research to solve problems. So that gave me a good handle of taking my academic skills and training and using it in an applied way to, like I said, to solve problems. So I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, but I did come of age here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm calling in from Southeast Portland in the Lents neighborhood. I'm actually just a few blocks away from the county line there in Clackamas County. And I live here with my partner, Nick, and our dogs, Benito and Vida. I identify as a queer man of color. And also my parents are Cuban immigrants, so I do identify as a Cuban American. So just a little bit about myself. I will pass it to my colleague and better half, Dr. Mossini, to share a little bit about herself, and then Kanya will share as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. I've been having some technical issues all day, so I'm actually calling in from my phone. I see, Andres, you're nodding, so great. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Dr. Mira Mossini. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the senior researcher at the coalition. I'm trained as a cultural anthropologist. So my academic work was based primarily in India. That's where I did the bulk of my research. And I was studying and working with, in the context of India, Muslim minority communities, and trying to understand from an everyday lived experience what are sort of experiences of marginalization and stigmatization in that context. And while I was there, I was also doing applied research and working with nonprofits across the country, in rural parts of the country, particularly so in the central part and along the Indo-Nepal border. When I returned to the United States, I taught for several years in universities, mostly in the Midwest, in Michigan and Ohio. And then I moved to the Portland area about 3 years ago. And I live currently in Northeast Portland in the Cully neighborhood with my partner, Sarah, and our dog, Kaya, and I identify as a queer woman of color. I am also the daughter of immigrants. My mom is from Pakistan and my dad is from India. And that's a little bit about me. So it's great to be here with y'all, and I'll pass it over to Kanya.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Kanya. I also use she, her pronouns. I am new to CCC as well as new to Portland. I started in June, and before that, I was finishing up my master's at the University of Oregon in prevention science, which is at the intersection of a lot of different social science disciplines, including psychology, sociology, with a big emphasis on public health. And most of my work, or all of my work, has been in marginalized communities. In my undergrad, I worked at the Multicultural Center. And then in my graduate studies, my focus was on intimate partner violence prevention in the LGBTQ community, as well as mental health promotion and suicide prevention in the LGBTQ community. And I worked within the Alliance to Prevent Suicide, or Oregon Alliance to Prevent Suicide. And that was kind of 3 years in 1 minute. Before then, I am corn-fed. from Michigan. And I'm currently living in the Northeast Portland area. Yep, that's it.
Thank you, Kanya. Thank you, Mira. So we always begin with sharing a little bit about our histories, our biographies, our standpoints, so that you have a better understanding of us as humans before we dive into the work. So thank you for listening and learning. And hopefully we get to learn more about you all in this process that we'll be in together for the next few years. So today we're going to talk with you a little bit about our update, an update on our research. I guess, Kanya, you can start sharing the slides. You can just start with the intro page. That'd be great. You back it up one for me. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit with you about what we've been doing since we completed the environmental scan. I'm assuming y'all have seen this environmental scan that happened a few years ago when we first started working with the county to better understand sort of the perspectives that the employees were sharing and a lot of the perspectives that came from the listening sessions that were held in Clackamas County. And that really sort of helped us orientate ourselves more to what was happening in the county. But since then, we're going to share with you the relationship building that we've been doing. Kanya is going to talk with you a little bit about the data that we've collected and the folks that we've spoken to about data, and also some of the data we're in the progress of collecting and hope to have more of in the future. And then Mira will tell you a little bit about our steering committee. So there's 2 steering committees that are helping lead this research, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then we've also spent some time reaching out to our Washington County government colleagues. Since our last report, Leading with Race in Washington County in 2018, has been around for about 4 years now. We really wanted to get a good sense of what are some of the government folks there thinking have been accomplished or have shifted since the research was published 4 years ago. So Mira's going to tell you a little bit more about some of those things that we heard. And we imagine you could expect some of those things to be shifting as well in Clackamas County from this research. And then I will take the mic back and I'll tell you a little bit about what's coming up, what are the next steps. And then we'll spend the most of the time today, hopefully, having some discussion about the questions. So you saw all of this in the memo that we sent. Hopefully you all had a chance to check that out. But we really want to spend some time just chatting, getting to know each other and learning more about each other and how we can support each other moving forward in this research. So that's a little bit of the roadmap for today. Kanya, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this research justice study is a study that is co-constructed with community from the beginning. So we have done a lot of pre-work before we begin co-constructing the study with community to prepare ourselves, to better understand the landscape, to build relationships, right? This type of research takes a lot of time because you really got to get to know each other, right? We're not rushing to results. We are really focusing on a process that feels good and that allows us to really absorb what we're hearing from everybody in the county. So what we've really began with is relationship building. So since, oh goodness, was this October, I think, or about October or so, we have been meeting with a lot of people, well over 150 people. Mira and Kanya and I have met to have discussions about who we are, what we're doing, and what we hope to glean from in Clackamas County, and to hear some of the perspectives of community members and people working in governments and other dominant institutions across the county. We've spoken specifically to about 60 different data actors, and that's the term we use to describe folks who work with data, right? People whose job is to use data to make decisions, to report out to you all to make decisions, right? So the data folks is what we call data actors, and Kanya's going to tell you a little bit more about them and what we've heard from them. And then, of course, we formed 2 steering committees, a student steering committee and an adult, for lack of a better term, steering committee. And Mira's going to tell you more about those 2. So thank you so much for listening and being here. And I'm going to pass it over to Kanya to tell you a little bit more about the data and the data actors.
Yeah, so as I said, we've talked to a lot of data folks throughout the county. And these are some of the sectors that these folks have kind of belonged to and kind of worked in terms of like the data that they were looking at. And we asked these folks a couple of three questions about what data that they were using, as well as what was that data missing, or what data did they wish that they had, as well as any type of other colleagues that we should be talking to. And through all of that information, we have this understanding of what types of data are being used in Clackamas, as well as what are some challenges with those data and what are the wishes. So the data that is kind of used and that I've searched through in Clackamas County mostly come from federal. So this is like the census, state or county reports, dashboards, as well as organizational data. So data that organizations are collecting internally about either their staff or the folks that they're serving. And some of the data shortcomings are lack of representation, and this is by BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as rural community members, unhoused community members, and migrant representation. The data is also excludes narratives, so they're mostly number statistics reporting, which is fine, but it doesn't give us all that nuanced data that really tells us what's going on in specific communities. And then also the data is not as accessible, and this could be due to HIPAA, or because if they're internal organization data, that just might not be data that they share out. Some of the data wishes are in more data accuracy, so better data collection methods, for more diverse populations, as well as collecting narratives, which kind of feeds into data accuracy as well. And then a better understanding of trend data, so how things are changing in Clackamas County. And some data that we are getting that we're kind of getting our hands on are better. So we're working with a student to work through some GIS mapping. So we're mapping things like language in Clackamas County, as well as language and geography. So whether people live in urban or rural or wild spaces. And then another thing that we're doing is working with the census in RealD format, and that is an OHA kind of standard for racial demographic information. And if you have more questions about that, I can talk about that in the question section. But I will pass it to either Mira or Andres for the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Kanya. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the steering committee. So as Andres mentioned, we are working with two steering committee groups, and one is composed of students and the other one is composed of non-students or adults or community members. And the steering committee is really the central guiding body of people who drive this research from the beginning till the end. So the research justice model, as some of you will probably know, is really about community-led research, as opposed to other ways or mainstream ways of doing research where a handful of researchers who are typically credentialed sort of come in, they have their own set of questions, their own ways of collecting data, their own ways of analyzing the data, and that are often very removed from what community desires or what community wants, the questions that community wants to ask. So the research justice model really does center these steering committee groups throughout the process. I will start with talking about the student steering committee and why we wanted to have a separate one for students. So during the relationship building phase, and then we're still in that phase, but early on from, in October, November, December, we were reaching out to folks and we were hearing a lot of stories from school district administrators, teachers, parents that we spoke with about how their kids or kids that they know are really organizing in high schools across the county. They're forming equity groups in high schools. They're organizing anti-hate rallies or actions. And we kept on hearing this, and we're like, this is a really important story. It's an important Clackamas County story. And so we thought, well, who best to tell the story than students, right? So we got a group of students. We're actually 5 students right now. We've had our first meeting, and we're really emphasizing in terms of a student-led project to tell that story about what's happening in high schools. We're really emphasizing this idea of a tools for tools approach. So this is students this is the idea that students will plan a project, maybe host some workshops to do some skills sharing. And then in the process of that skills sharing during the workshop, other students who are attending the workshop may share some of their stories or some of their experiences. And those stories and experiences are the data that the student steering committee will work with and think about, how do we want to present this? The student steering committee, both steering committees are really also central for community building across the county, because a lot of what we were hearing from students and adults is students of color and folks of color across the county is there is this sense that our communities, oftentimes we have to look outside the county, right, for our communities. And so coming together as a steering committee is also a really powerful way to build community, to make those connections to people that you wouldn't normally meet across the regions. So the community steering committee, we have 9 members and we're growing. So we're going to spend the next couple of weeks reaching out to a few more folks and inviting them to join. Currently, we have folks on the steering committee that are a part of Black, African American, and African diaspora communities. Many have experiences of immigration and migration. We have Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous representation on the steering committee. And we have folks who live across the different regions in the county, urban, suburban, and rural. I will also say that on the student side, we also have that range of geographic representation for urban, suburban, and rural. And then on the community steering committee, we have a breadth of work sectors represented here, as you can see. So we're happy to talk more if you have more questions about the steering committee. What is their roles, their purpose, what will they be doing in the next several months? So we're happy to talk more about that. You can go to the next slide, Kanya. Okay, so as Andres mentioned, we really wanted to understand how our 2018 research justice study in Washington County, what were some of the changes that had materialized as a result of the publication of that research 4 years ago. So we circulated a survey, and the survey essentially had 2 parts. One was we wanted to get a sense of to what extent had the 8 calls to action that were included in the report, to what extent had there been some movement around, to what extent had there been some movement around those 8 calls to action? And then the second part of the survey was really asking more specific questions around, what in terms of like budget allocation at the government or at the agency level, what were some of the budget allocations towards elements of the report or the calls to action? What kinds of personnel changes had been or are in the process of being implemented? And then things around vendor contracts. So to what extent are government agencies reaching out to and contracting with specifically BIPOC vendors? So on this slide, we learned about some of the changes. So we learned that there is the new Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. So there's new staff dedicated to DEI work and community engagement work. We learned that there's a new equity tool that's been implemented for the 2022-2023 fiscal year countywide. There's a lot more movement and practices around accessibility that the different government agencies are implementing. There's increased leadership, increased representation of BIPOC folks in leadership positions. There's been hiring changes. And there's increased partnerships with culturally specific organizations throughout the county and more contracts with BIPOC vendors. There were some challenges. You can go to the next slide, Kanya. So there were some challenges that folks did bring up. So the changes along the budget and hiring practices, that was not like sort of standard across all government agencies. Policy decisions, folks mentioned that policy decisions need to be made with more equity consideration sort of baked into those processes. More intentional DEI training was something that was just brought up. Many participants were unaware of some of the BIPOC partnerships, and some folks brought up this, this equity practice of compensating community members for their time whenever they do some community engagement work. And then lastly, some folks said that there is actually a need for more BIPOC representation at all levels of agency. So not just at the leadership levels, but at all levels. So this really pointed to a need for more, for different types of hiring practices. So I think that's my bit. I will pass it back to Andres.
Yeah, thanks, Mira. So this is just a little bit of a flavor of what we've been learning. We're actually going to be giving a presentation of this 2018 research, which seems kind of wild to me that we're giving a presentation of something that was 4 years ago, but because there's still people in Washington County trying to understand its implications and what it means for their agency. We do also have a lot of community members. What we shared here was not from the perspective of community of what they think has changed and shifted. So we will continue to engage with Washington County over the course of this research. And part of the intention for that is so that we have a better sense of what may happen when we're done with this research in Clackamas County, what may be some of the challenges or concerns from jurisdictions across the county, just so that we get ahead of that, right? So we have a better sense of what that is. And we'll continue to share more with you and Martine as we meet with her and her team every other week as we learn more and as we engage in Washington County more to get a better sense of what's happening today. We want to share a little bit with you about some of the more immediate next steps. So as I mentioned, this contract still goes for another 2 years or so, I believe. I think 2 years. So we are in the thick of it right now, just starting the research process, which our steering committees will lead over the next year. And then it'll be about another year for us to finish the writing and checking back in with community and making sure that we've heard from everybody, right? Or is there more data that you'd like to see, or what's missing here, right? So there's going to be this is a long process, right? It's a marathon. We're not rushing to the end. So we still have plenty of time to hear from folks and alter things and shift things and add things. So we're excited for all of that. But the most immediate next steps, now that we have these steering committees formed, is to begin really establishing what is the research design. So how will we do research? in the communities. We know that we need to do research across urban, rural, suburban spaces, right? And even wild, we've been thinking a lot about what it means to be wild in Clackamas County and who lives there and what that is. And seeing some of these maps have been really fascinating to us to try to understand who lives where in the county. So more on that, as we'll need more help from you all to better understand, especially some of the more rural and wild parts of the county. But we'll be thinking about research design and the data collection strategies, right? So the community itself, the steering committees will co-construct that. And we think of that along the lines, not just of race and ethnicity, but of geographic location, of sector, right? So we really want to know, as Mira sort of pointed out, those different sectors, what the experiences are of people in different occupations across the county as well. So we really want to provide a wide breadth of perspectives of Clackamas County community members. After we we co-construct the design and the strategies, then we will go ahead and start collecting data with community members. So we'll be able to share more with you about what that looks like here to come. And then I have a little bit to share with you in the next slide here about how you can help us collect some data as well. But that'll happen then. And the student steering committee, as Mira talked about, will be planning for their project early summer with a goal to launch that in the fall. And one thing I just wanted to add to what Mira was saying, the students are really excited to find meaningful ways to share their perspective with decision makers in Clackamas County. They want to know how to share testimony. They want to know how to be a part of the process on how decisions are made. And so we're really excited to be working with them, and they'll be really motivated this summer, and we'll be ready to launch something in the fall to help them learn how to share their voice and to have examples of their experiences and what they desire for change in their schools. So there's a lot more beyond the fall. Obviously, as I mentioned, we have 2 more years, but that's just a little bit for now, and we can talk more about these if you have questions. But I just wanted to share those next steps with you. You can go to the next slide, Carmen. Okay, so that's a little bit of the presentation. We didn't want to spend too much time talking at you. We really wanted to have some time to hear from you and respond to some of your thoughts. So we have these set of questions here, and we can pop these in the chat and go back to the chat or the big screen so that we can share and see each other as we discuss. And then at the end, we'll talk just a little bit about how you can support us moving forward. So you can stop sharing, Kanya. And oh, I should read the questions. I apologize. Okay, so the first question we had was just trying to get a better sense of from you all, what are some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion updates that you have? And we've spoken to a lot of you as well in this call, but I'm just curious if there's anything new that's happening in your jurisdiction, in your organization, that you are thinking about, that you're gearing up for, that you're struggling with, right? Just to get a sort of sense from the C4 if there's new things. So that's our first, and we don't have to go in order. I guess we can kind of hop around, but we also want to ask, what do you hope to learn from the research justice study? And then lastly, any other questions you have about our progress ahead. So we can drop those in the chat, and there's really no order to this. So whoever wants to jump in. Go ahead, Valerie. I don't know your titles. I apologize.
That's okay. I'm Valerie Pratt from Tualatin, and I just wanted to share, this is kind of exciting because I'm on the committee that interviews and recommends people for advisory committees. And the 3 of us on that committee, we've over the last year, we just did this a week ago, but we decided that we have a diversity group in Tualatin, but they've become a Spanish-speaking affinity group, and one of our council goals is DEI. So we've got a committee that's going to help define, that we are now appointing the people to, that are going to help define what an advisory committee to the council will be like. And the thing I'd like to learn from what you have and what I've really found from interviewing these people is people from different perspectives think of things you would have never thought of from your different perspectives. So it's very important to have all those different views to make an informed decision.
That's wonderful. We'll be reaching out again, Valerie. Thank you. I see a comment from Brian. Thank you. That's wonderful. You can use the chat as well if that's more comfortable for you. We appreciate all of your feedback and thoughts.
Councilor Sherman.
Thank you very much. I will jump in here as well, and thank you very much. For all the hard work. It's really it's very intriguing and eye-opening at a lot of levels. And so I'm a city councilor in Happy Valley, and so in our city, we started this process a couple of years ago and started internally and realized very quickly that we really didn't even know the right questions to ask. So it was it's you don't know what you don't know. So we partnered with an outside consultant that brings in DEI expertise and worked with our community. We created a task force and solicited public feedback for over a year. Yeah, and really went out to try to hear from our community to better understand what the questions are that we should even be asking. And so from that, we then created a DEI strategic plan that was approved by City Council back in 21. There really is an underlying foundation for all the parts of city functions, both at the elected level, but also at the functional city level, hiring and appointments and just all the things that we do. So, an example would be in our Public Arts Committee, we have a rotating sculpture garden. And so we kind of assessed that situation to even figure out, what are the hurdles to approaching that? Because again, didn't even know the questions to ask. And some of it is, in hindsight, some of it was so common sense, but it really just eluded us. So as we tried to understand the barriers and then create kind of a mitigation strategy for those, things like the fact that we only allowed program submissions via online was a barrier that we never even really thought about. Our materials were only in English. That's pretty obvious one, again, in hindsight. We required applicants to submit a resume, really needed to create a tutorial to help them understand how to apply and how to make the process easier. Things like the application we had was a really long application that took a lot of time and effort to create. And even something as simplistic as, some of our criteria revolved around like prohibited content and things like that. And even that had a flavor that needed to be addressed. And so we kind of took that as a starting point, and then we really tried to greatly expand, kind of creating an engagement toolbox, how we went out and approached the public and solicited feedback. So we created a much more robust email list to identify program participants of other programs from other areas, and actually created kind of a whole 5-state area just focusing on Oregon, a cross section of the arts culture, members of kind of equity specific groups in the region, tribal partners, educational interests. And so by expanding that, we just got a much more robust solicitation to that. So that's just an example of like one minor thing we did at the city that really is having a broader impact. Now, going forward, a lot of it really for us revolves around how do I identify the success of these programs going forward? If we move the needle a little bit, is that enough? Is just any movement a good thing? So that's kind of what we're working on going forward. And then what we hope to get out of the research, definitely identifying kind of a collaborative partnership and the ability to build stronger relationships with the equity leaders in the community, just kind of creating that nexus where we can identify them. That would be very helpful. And, maybe one of the questions we do have with the process is, when are we going to start to see kind of the results of the overarching study? When can we start incorporating that into our day-to-day decision making? So that's a whole lot of drinking from the fire hose, but appreciate your time. Thank you.
Those are wonderful examples of changes. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm taking notes here too. And you will all have an opportunity to see some of the report and some of the findings before we finish too. So we'll have opportunities for folks to share. So thank you.
Councilor Heisey, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Kathy. I'm a counselor from Milwaukee, City of Milwaukee, and I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as queer. And I am really glad to hear your work. And I think you probably have spoken with John, our equity manager here in the city. So I won't go into great detail. I know Martine knows him, so. But I think that of the things that we have done that I have seen that have made the most difference, one is we have an annual solicitation now for our boards and commissions and interviewing new members. And John took a look at that application and applied an equity lens to it and totally revamped it and took out a lot of exclusionary language that, as Councillor Sherman called out, you wouldn't have necessarily seen, like, are you a registered voter? There's no reason we need to know that for someone to serve on a committee. So it's much more welcoming. We're also allowing people to submit applications via video, so they don't have to necessarily come in and do an in-person interview, which can be super intimidating if you haven't been, if government means something to you that has some negative connotations. So I think we're just doing all of this for the first time, but I think it's going to net us some good results. And the other thing that we've done, aside from hiring John as a full-time staff person looking at these issues and appointing an equity steering committee that the council is very hands-off with, they are identifying the work that they are doing. We are not asking them questions, and hoping that is an empowering issue or empowering way to approach it. But we have also, in all of this, I've forgotten, I lost my thread. So we'll just leave it at that. If it was really brilliant and I think you haven't heard it before, I'll come back to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis.
Sure. Thank you so much for the presentation tonight, not only on kind of where you're finding the work to be done here in Clackamas County, but also, frankly, in just kind of benchmarking us with Washington County. There are some significant differences between the two counties, particularly on DEI work, particularly when it comes to some basic funding-based issues. But I do think being neighbors to Multnomah County and having many communities that are kind of bedroom communities, we have something to learn and we have some similarities in this realm. So I do appreciate in this instance the comparison to Washington County. Other times I find it way less useful if we're talking about transportation, for instance. I guess, coming from the Metro perspective, really have been trying to lift up the data that we all have and know, which is that our communities in Clackamas have more diversity than is organized, recognized, funded. And we're trying to bring forward funding for particularly emerging organizations with civic capacity. And I guess I would hope to get out of some of this research some answers to what are the kind of bricks and mortar locations that are already used as gathering places? How can we make sure that we have adjacent resources? And what are the opportunities for not only what I would call kind of Portland-based CBOs who want to spin off, but to actually have some homegrown organic networks that get better funded, better supported, and don't kind of take on that Portland web, which, some people, like going into community in town, but with the transportation barriers we have, even just getting from west to east in Clackamas County or from the outer bits to the inner bits, I mean, we almost need to be organizing 4 different communities of interest to help with the geography. And I would love to see that kind of need mapping.
Thank you. Mayor Buck.
Thank you. Good evening. Echo the thanks on the presentation. So to share first an update on what we've been doing in Lake Oswego, we're in our second year now of having a DEI advisory board. And this past year, we brought on, as part of the city's executive team, a DEI equity program manager who's working to facilitate the board and working with the city team and all the departments as a whole. One of our council goals is, of course, supporting the work of the DEI Advisory Board, and our mission as a city is creating a welcoming and inclusive community. So like some of my colleagues, other cities, we've been focused in part on our advisory boards, increasing accessibility and diversity on those boards. The Rdi Advisory Board itself now sits in on, well, I guess this will be their first year. We had other folks kind of playing this role before, but they're going to be sitting in on our interviews to help give advice and help in that selection process. Our DEI Advisory Board helped us put together a new, even just a kind of a marketing video as we work to solicit applications and work through different channels, but something that was more, approachable. We want people to, so many folks have, idea, the notion that, to serve on a various board, you have to have some sort of academic background. Like if you want to serve on Sustainability Advisory Board, you have to have some kind of environmental science degree, or the budget committee, you need to be a CPM. We're like, your community experience is enough really to serve on any advisory board, your experience as a human. So we're just trying to really broaden our reach and make sure that everyone in the community feels welcome on those boards. And then one thing we did over this past year, and we're then continuing and expanding on, again, in cooperation both with community organizations as well as our DI Advisory Board, is doing more cultural community events that focus on the different cultures that we have in Illinois. And that has been huge. Maybe the biggest thing. Folks have really, we're doing this month, will be our second AAPI Heritage Month celebration, which was just a huge success last year. We have a Juneteenth celebration, MLK Day, and then we're doing this will be the first year we're doing this in the fall. It's a large, like, multicultural, because we recognize there's so many cultures within the city to celebrate, and we're trying to have one large event that it takes into account many of them in the fall. And these have just been really popular in addition to more, what I would say, the more traditional events that the city does as well. And then just to touch on ARPA, we're using some of our ARPA dollars to solicit grants to community organizations that would in part help those most impacted by COVID, which mostly are neighbors of color. And this past year also, we completed a community dialogue on policing, which we entitled Leading with Race, something like the Washington County, that focused on the experience of BIPOC community members with respect to the police department. From that, we identified themes and then an action plan that we just adopted earlier this year. And so that's what we've had going on. And and I appreciate the work that you are doing. And I did my question, Joe, was what, given that Clackamas County with so many different the geography is so different, and between the cities, the rural, the urban, and just so many cities, within the county, more so than the other two counties in the region. How does that impact your work and recommendations, and how can cities, how will cities, or how do you envision cities utilizing your research to inform their programs and policies and work going forward?
Dr. Lopez, did you want to respond to that?
Apologies, my Zoom crashed, so I missed the last question.
Oh, I was, Dr. Lopez, I was asking what, just given Clackamas, the fact that we have so many cities, within the county compared to the other two counties, how does that impact your research, and how do you envision the cities of Clackamas County, the cities within Clackamas County, in addition to the county, being able to utilize your research for their programs and work going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a huge question. At this point, that will be something that we would leave to the steering committee, right? So we really want the steering committee to lead on what we should be doing, and then as we initiate what they're suggesting and what they believe, and of course we'll help them think broadly and guide some of that thinking. But they're really the leaders, And then if there's gaps and stuff, we'll certainly fill in. But in the environmental scan, we heard from the cities really, which is why we asked this DEI question, that many of you all are in different places in this DEI journey, right? And so we imagine that the findings will be tailored to those from those different perspectives, right? For those who I think I can't remember the classification off the top of my head, but it was sort of like folks who were just starting out, don't even know the right questions, and then folks who are moving and shaking, but not sure if they're doing it right, And then some folks who feel like they're really ready to go. I don't remember. I'm making them up now, trying to remember the last one, but yes, exactly, 1 to 3 tiers. So we imagine we'll be tailoring the data in certain ways that will be helpful for those in different parts of the journey. But we'll have more conversation as we go.
Thank you. Mayor Walters.
Thank you. And thank you for the great presentation and all the wonderful work you're doing. It's really exciting, so thank you. I came onto council in West Lynn in 2019, and at our first goal setting retreat, I realized that there was no language about race, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the first thing to do was to put that as one of our goals. And so we attended and helped plan the multi-city equity summit, the first one with Lake Oswego and all sorts of partnering agencies around the region, which was, I thought, really great. We had some wonderful speakers, and I feel like everybody walked away and learned a lot, but also had fun and got to engage and have good conversations. Shortly thereafter, we had the police scandal with the wrongful arrest of Mr. Michael Fesser by the Westland Police Department. So a lot of our work around RDEI began to focus on police reform and accountability. So the message became not just feeling welcome in Westland, but feeling welcome and safe in Westland, to be in Westland, traveling through Westland. And so we, Martine, I don't know if she regrets it or not, but got to be the facilitator for our police reform oversight task force, where we had some really, really, really good conversations and really hard conversations. After the murder of George Floyd, I mean, everything was coming together at the same time, and it was an intense time to really examine all of our systems here in Westland, and how people felt unwelcome and excluded and didn't want to be here. And we had a terrible reputation in the region for that. So we've been working hard. We got a new city manager, and he has taken it on as a real project to keep moving forward to repair the reputation of our city. And so, like many of the other things that have been discussed here, we've been doing, we had an equity audit of the city itself to see what our staff looked like, what the language in our documents look like. Councilor Heisey mentioned, we now have community advisory groups, not citizen advisory groups, and just even the simple changes, neutral language, gender neutral language especially. And sharing our pronouns, all of those things that make people feel comfortable and welcome to interact with us and live here. And so now we're moving forward after all of sort of this intense reckoning and that work. We're trying to weave more celebration into that. So we're really appreciating the diversity that we have in the city and trying to bring people in. So we have some great Pride events happening. We had a great teen Pride holiday party a couple of years ago, which was super fun at the library. I was trying to get a big Pride event in the city this year, but it may not happen, but we're doing some Pride stuff through the library. That's exciting. We have great book discussion groups. We did a multicultural event last fall where we had music and great food and vendors. It was super fun. Kids, adults, everyone dancing and just enjoying the sunshine in the park. And we're going to have a Juneteenth event like Lake Oswego on the same day. So hopefully people can travel back and forth and go to each one. I think they're both going to be fantastic. I'm not going to let Mayor Buck outdo me again. You know, we're just moving forward, but trying to be very, very intentional that this is ongoing work, and we'll be doing this for the rest of our lives, right? Making it better for everybody. So anyway, thank you. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you. I see a few more hands, but I don't want to lose a question that Mayor Hodson put in the chat a while back. It says, in the private sector, there is a shift to add belonging to DEI. And is there a shift? Is there this shift also in the public sector?
I guess I will briefly respond to that if that's okay. As a government county employee, that's such a great question, Mayor Hodson. And yes, there's a lot more conversation around belonging as sort of the, you know, those of you that were able to experience John Powell a couple of weeks ago, inclusion 2.0 is belonging. And so we really talk about not just including people at the table, but co-creation. And so co-creation is I value you, I see you, and you can bring your whole self at the table. We create that we're creating together, which is really what I'm in awe with the research justice work, because it is about it's about leading with the communities who are the experts with their lived experience, and a co-creation, hopefully with government as a result.
Thank you. I'll plug a link in there from Martine for John Powell, who she just mentioned, if y'all want to do more on that. Councillor Heisey?
My brain started working again. I'll keep it super quick. The other thing that I was going to say is that, and this actually connects to the belonging piece, is thinking about ways that engage people in the community and provide them a way to belong and participate that aren't exclusively serving on committees, because that can actually be a really huge barrier, is what we have learned. So that was the other point I was going to make around that. And then in terms of some useful information that would be valuable to get out of this, is just, you know, everyone who has looked at inclusion, justice, equity work in Clackamas County has seen that we just don't have the networks, like Councilor Lewis was mentioning. The community piece is missing. It's absent here in a way that it just isn't in the other two large metro counties. And as government, we have a limited scope for supporting that. You know, we can't be that. So any useful stories about when government has delivered on that, ways that we can best support the creation of that community and of building those networks would be really, really valuable, because if we know what it is, we'll do it. And we just don't want to do things that set this back. But we know that we have some resources that we can put to doing that support work. So just some guidance on how best to do that would be tremendously helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Myers?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much to the panel members. You've made a very good presentation on a really important issue. I'm with the CPOs, and I think about and talk about the rural and unincorporated areas. And so I want to change focus just for a couple minutes into that area. I noticed in one of the very first slides, you had a category called lack of representation. And one of the comments in there was rural. And that disturbs me, as it always does. And I want to try and change that dynamic. And I want to volunteer my help to try and make that happen. I don't know how much you're working with the CPOs, the community planning organizations, but we're organized and we're working on getting a little bit better organized. We don't have what all the cities are telling us about, and it's so good to hear all the work that they're doing. We have volunteers, we have committees, and we need your help, I would say. It's not just the CPOs, there are also umbrella organizations, one or two, that you could perhaps come and talk to about this. So I really want to invite you to that to start with, and how we can be engaged in this process also. The other thing I want to mention specifically, I mean, there's a lot of rural and unincorporated area out here. The rural area would be your key into talking to the people in the wild areas or in the rural houselessness areas. This would be something you could really, that you could help. Malala CPO, you're going to find individuals, 6 to 10, 12 people who have been in the community for a long time, who know the dynamics of it and are engaged in it. These are people that you could talk to, for instance, for people living in the rural areas that need outreach in the CPO area for that. The other bucket we have in the unincorporated areas are the urban areas. There are two very large urban areas. It's Oak Grove and it's Jennings Lodge, both of which together would make the largest city in the state, I understand. There's a lot of people living there. I just want to make sure that you're reaching out specifically to those people and reaching out to those CPO boards. We'd appreciate it. That's all I have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. We look forward to engaging with you more. And we've actually seen the map and those numbers in those areas, thinking, wow, there's urban areas in these rural parts, right? How do we talk about that? And so we just had this conversation last week. So don't worry, you are on our list. We will certainly be out there.
Commissioner?
Yeah, one question or area I think I'd really like to see how, maybe some ideas of how we approach it, and that is those who are immigrants. I identify as an immigrant. Most of my family have immigrated one way or another from one part of the world or another, but mostly from one part of the world that doesn't necessarily seem to get identified in the sense of their cultures, their unique cultures. So whether it's you're Turkish or Syrian or Iranian or Anatolian or whatnot, your skin color could be white, but the definition of people of color around the world is different than we talk about people of color, because it's assumed in the United States that people of color are everyone that's not white, for example. But in other parts of the world, it's really about the marginalized aspects, people that are not feeling belonged in the community. And as wars break out and people get displaced, genocides, what's going on even frankly today in Ukraine, people are being moved out, so they don't feel like they belong in the community. So when they come to the US and they're here in our communities and they speak a different language, they might have white skin, they might speak a different language, but they have a unique culture, and their culture does not fit very well in the United States, is not identified. How are we reaching out? And they're really typically quiet, but how do we reach out to those to get them engaged?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mira and Kanya, I don't know if you want to hop in any of these too, feel free, but we do have maybe five or so folks on the steering committee who identify as immigrants, who have all come to this country in different ways. A few are who are refugees, who have had that specific experience, and also who work in immigration services across the county. So we are tapped into those networks, as well as a few of the Slavic networks as well, who organize pretty heavily in the county. So as Mira said, we're still adding a few more people to our steering committee. So we're trying to balance race, ethnicity, geography, legal status, right? We're trying to balance all these things, so our committee is really reflective of all of them. But we've had we've had a lot of conversation about immigration and what that means, particularly in Clackamas County. So we're really looking forward to that. Those folks will not be missed. And I hope you can keep us accountable if you think that's not happening. So we can talk more about that as we go.
Okay, one real quick follow-up, and that what would be your definition in this process, in this study, as far as people of color? What would be the definition? In the spirit of belonging.
Well, I can chime in on that. So one thing that I did want to draw your attention to, we did circulate frequently asked questions where we talk about the term Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC, and why that is a terminology that we're using. We all know that these terms, whether it's BIPOC, whether it's people of color, are insufficient. We know that they've come because out of a history of organizing and activism for, for various like political ends. And so it doesn't, these terms are sort of catch-alls, and they don't capture all of the nuance and complexities of like migration histories, et cetera, et cetera. But, we think about people of color in terms of similar experiences of those communities that have had similar experiences of marginalization, exclusion, that stem from structural or systemic racism. And that, of course, that does include folks like from the regions that you were talking about, Turks, Syrians, Kurds, right? Those who have these complex immigration histories. They might on first glance look white, but because of their cultural practices, religious practices, they experience marginalization. And in our, I would argue in our understanding of POC, they're people of color. So that's, and folks on this call, my colleagues might even have a different understanding of POC, but I will offer that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
If I could just add to that, I also think that, yes, we have our definition, but like many things in this research project, it is a lot of these terms are also going to be influenced by our steering committee as well. So they're still growing and changing. And as we talk to more people and start gathering more data, these terms, everything is very flexible. So these terms will also change with the knowledge that we accumulate.
I'm sorry, I just want to add one more piece, which is it's really important that part of the definition of a person of color is if you identify that way. And so we never want to put someone in a position where they say, well, I don't identify that way, so don't group me into this group that I don't identify with. So it's really about how you identify and your lived experience, not just what is assigned to you in terms of race or ethnicity.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thanks so much. Since you're talking about the work that's ongoing with these committees, and I think I remember seeing the slide said you had 4 students on the student committee. Are you still recruiting students? Can we be helpful in some of our networks for some young people? And if so, do you mean high school, or are you also interested in youthful community college folks?
That's a great question. Thank you, Counselor. We have, so there are 5 students that come from across the county who have started these clubs, but we've also reached out to every school board, I think, at this point now, and have spoken with folks. And the process that these students will create, the workshop, that will also bring in a lot of students. So it won't be just these 5 perspectives, right? It'll be the perspective of students all across the county. But this is a good segue to the last part, which is how you can support us. So yes, you can certainly connect us with people. I put this here in the chat. One, you can connect us with data actors. That's a big one, right? Folks who work with data, folks who have ideas about data. We'd love to meet more of those people. Of course, if there's community members, students, please connect us with those. And I'm sorry, I forgot to answer the second part of your question. The student committee is focused on high school, but one of our steering committee members is faculty at at the community college, Clackamas County Community College, the other CCC. So we will have a very intentional engagement around community college students. So that'll be as if it's its own community, right, of folks. So both to those. In addition to connecting us with folks, you can also share any information you think is important about BIPOC community members in Clackamas County. Any news stories, incidents, Facebook groups, I mean, literally anything. Feel free to spam our emails. We want to hear from everyone. We are gathering so much information, and we will be using all of that as we write this report. So please feel free to share with us. And the last bit of how you can support us is also by inviting us to join you at any community engagement events you have, or any of those awesome celebrations that I heard about, or other trips. We want to hear all about them. We want to document them, and we'd like to come to them as well. Part of the data collection process, while it will be grounded in the steering committee doing their own ideas of how we want to collect data, that also means Kanya and Mira and myself will be throughout the county going to events, doing participant observation, right? We will go to places, observe what's happening, how things are landing, what folks are saying, right? And that is also data that we will use in this research. So it's really important. And I already got an invitation from Bridging Cultures and Canby to go on their beach trip, which I think is the end of the month. So hopefully I'll be on that bus to the beach and get a lot of good time with community members. So we really welcome those. And we have 2 years, like I said, still. So please let us know of what's ahead.
Well, great discussion. Thank you so much. Round of applause for our speakers tonight. Thank you for joining us. Trent, where does that bring us today? This moment here. Shelter discussion?
Yes, thank you for that segue. So C4, at your last meeting, you had a panel come and talk with you about how shelter activity is working in Clackamas County and some of the pros and cons, hurdles and opportunities that exist here. It was a really, really good conversation. I think that many of you actually have emailed me after the fact and want more of that type of dialogue to help y'all, help your community in this topic that I am finding is meaningful to each and every one of you. My goal, as well as the executive committee's goal now, is to help you get more of that in a way that would be meaningful to you. So I know I kind of just said the same thing, but in a little bit of a different way. We can do this a lot of ways, but just as I've said in the past, with transportation, y'all have talked about it enough times that I have a sense for how to help y'all get very nuanced in your conversation. But your process around the sheltering discussion is still, at least for the conversation of C4 and coordinating, still needs a little bit more discussion time on y'all's end. And so the executive committee felt like this would be a good opportunity to hear y'all's reaction from the last meeting about sheltering, and then also hear from y'all how y'all want to move forward or what further conversations you would like to have. Here are a couple of updates that I also have in addition. So at the very end of your packet is a value statement on housing and sheltering that Clackamas County Board of Commissioners adopted a couple of weeks ago, a week or two ago. This was not necessarily in response to y'all's conversation. It's been in the works for a little bit of time, but it's similar to the transportation values around tolling that passed last year at Clackamas County, or maybe that was 2 years ago. I'm losing track of time. But these are, sort of guiding principles around how we are hoping to pursue and advance housing in Clackamas County. We also want that to be a partnership with every one of y'all. We have great staff here. Those housing dollars are coming this way. There's a huge desire for sheltering and supportive housing services. Those partnerships are going to be critical in doing that. These values are going to sort of inform how we advance those goals. So that's a resource for all of us. And I think that much like our transportation document, this is probably a living document. And so amenable to change, but primarily amenable to discussion. The other thing that I've been thinking about as a way to support this group is I've been trying to think about y'all's retreat, which was mentioned earlier, and have been vetting this idea with the executive committee. This is still open-ended, but it can be part of the dialogue. And I'm wondering if it would be fruitful to take a sort of a hybrid approach to our traditional ways of doing a retreat, shove you all into a bus respectfully, and then take y'all to Eugene and look at a variety of the housing sheltering programs that are there, because they run the suite of different entry levels of housing. We could do similar things more locally, like in Portland. We also have the Veterans Village here in Clackamas County. But the cool thing about Eugene is it provides a similar but different glimpse to a community of similar size to Clackamas County, with similar political spectrums to Clackamas County as well. And so I think that there would be maybe a lot more similarities to how it's unpacked in Eugene for Clackamas County than maybe how it's impacted in the city of Portland. Not that that's good or bad, just that there would be a closer parallel to the work. So that seems to me like an opportunity that we could do potentially as a substitute for a retreat, if that's something that would be of interest to this group. They also do some really cool things in transit, so I don't want to, down in Eugene, and the transit's also a priority for y'all, and I'm trying to find a way to get that on y'all's agenda, so we could maybe bake that in. But these things are going through my mind. What would be helpful to me and the executive committee is more talking from you on what are your priorities and what would you like us to bring back to this group.
So you have your hand up, Ed.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Trent, I think a visit to Eugene would be a great idea. Eugene, as you know, has all variations of houseless communities, from tent communities up through actual permanent small housing communities. And I think it would be quite an eye-opener to many of the village officials who may have never seen anything like that. I think it'd be worth. It would probably be a complete day tour to see it all, because there are at least 4 different communities I know of in Eugene.
It would absolutely be a complete day. It's a 2-hour trip down, 2-hour trip back. We would definitely have to stop at the Chinese dumpling place that I like to stop at. If I get to drive, that's just going to be part of it. I just want y'all to know. What else? What are some resources or tools or conversations that I can bring back to this group to help y'all advance some of these conversations, either collaboratively through C4 or to help y'all with conversations at y'all cities?
I'm gonna actually kind of maybe put a couple of the mayors, ask them a couple questions here. So when we last discussed this, I believe we sent a letter to you all, and then a couple of days later, I believe you met with the mayor's chairs meetings, and it seemed like that conversation continued. So where do you think? I'll ask Mayor Hodson and Mayor Buck and Mayor Walters, and as you being part of that, where do you think that left off at, or where it's at? Is that more of a discussion for here, or is it more of a discussion for there, or is it both?
Are you talking about supportive housing services in general?
Well, I guess that too, but more on the shelter discussion. I think we were talking about really the sheltering, and we sent a letter to you all encouraging that discussion with your councils and so forth. And then I know that Chair Smith also carried that discussion at a couple meetings ago. Maybe Mayor Hodson or Mayor Buck could, if you were there. I'm not sure who all attended that meeting. Mayor?
I'll yield to Mayor Buck because I wasn't at that meeting.
I wasn't there.
We are both a whole heck of a lot of help on this topic.
Okay.
I think that, to go back to your question, I think in looking at it, I think in looking at the piece that's in our packet, I do think it belongs probably at both. I think it is a mayors and chairs conversation, but I also think it is at this group as well, because I think we've got a lot of different jurisdictions, sizes of jurisdictions that are doing a lot of different things, and I think that might be a starting point of where is everybody at in this conversation. Like so the city of Canby just redid our goal setting session, and one of the topics, one of our goals is looking at the different and housing, but is it more about zoning changes? Is it how do we achieve building homes in that middle range? How do we get pricing down? Like all these things that would help us maybe solve some of this. I mean, Canby are being built at starting at $500,000, and they're selling, for, in some cases, 600. So that's crazy to think about in Canby. So how do when we talk about generational wealth, a lot of that is how do we get people into homes to start with, to own something into equity that enables them to, move into something larger or just have something that is theirs. So I think maybe we start with what that conversation maybe as this group is, or if the chair of the mayor, what's everybody been doing and kind of where is everybody at?
Thank you, Mayor Hodson. I do know that coming out of that discussion, Milwaukee had reached out to us and suggested a property that we took very seriously and asked our staff to look at it. And I think we realized that we couldn't make that property work. But sometimes if it's a shelter, it's really sometimes the biggest challenge is finding the right place. So, and you all have places, so possible places or locations where maybe it might be suitable. But that's certainly one of the biggest starts. That's how the Veterans Village happened. We found a place that we happen to own. It worked and we made it happen. And that's really sometimes can be the genesis of it. We have the resources coming online with the supportive housing services. So the money, if you will, is not so much going to be the challenge here going forward. It's really going to be the place and how we stand them up. Mayor Buck?
Well, yeah, that's great point, Commissioner Savis, and that's kind of what I took out of the last. When did we have? Was it? It must have been at the Metro Subcommittee. Did we talk about? When did the housing team? Was that?
I think it was here about 2 months ago.
Oh, it was
last
here?
month. It was last.
Just last month. I just okay. Yeah, that it's the location, but what would kind of to Mayor Hodson was talking about it in more general terms around affordable housing, but then specific to supportive housing, SHS and shelter is it might be helpful if we could, maybe we need to kind of map out with all the different cities, and the way that Clackamas County, we're not obviously not like Multnomah County where we have, a main city, a main urban center. And I mean, we don't have one main, urban city. We have many different forms and types of urban centers, and the landscape of the population is so diverse. But so being able to map out what specifically do we need? I mean, what types of shelters? I mean, there's great information that came from the team at the county. But specifically what types, how many, and even on a map, like where should it, what would ideally, given how the county is laid out, given transit or lack thereof in the county, et cetera, transportation, what does that look like? Even just general, I mean, not because I mean the specifics, that's a challenge, like the specific parcel, but even generally, on the west side, east side of the river, in our large county, where does the family shelter? Where, I don't know, just some place at least to give us, because it all right now seems so, we need so much, and it's kind of like, where do we start? And if we had kind of a blueprint, I guess, to work from, maybe.
Okay, great. Councilor Heisey?
So I'm hearing a couple of different things, and I'm thinking about the part where we've had significant turnover on C4 in the past year, and I'm flashing back to those long ago days when we were in the same space and we had in-person retreats, and staff led this wonderful exercise where we went and talked about, yes, Trent knew, he read my mind, these super awesome cards that are all of these different things that jurisdictions can do to encourage the development of supportive housing. And basically we had roundtable discussions and it was speed dating about which of these are your city pursuing and what is your experience like with those. I almost wonder if it would be worth it to do that again, because we have a shift, and or at the very least, if you could prepare for us, Trent, a handy dandy memo presenting each of those types of ways to engage in housing questions. You probably already have this somewhere, honestly, but just to help make sure that we've got a level playing field in understanding where the conversation could be, I think would be useful. I will also say that I love the idea of going down to Eugene because I've been wanting to do that for a long time. So if you want to drive me down there, Trent, sign me up. When we're talking about how we can work on the supportive housing services piece and thinking about the conversation we had last month here, you know, as Commissioner Savas said, we need sites. I think it would be helpful to our city anyway, to have very clear understanding, as Mayor Buck said already, of what you're really looking for in a site and what different populations need from different sites. You know, what a school age family shelter needs is different from single men in temporary transitional shelter, you know. So what do those places that you are trying to get help from us to identify look like? And beyond that, I think I would just also add that I can't stress enough that having some supportive services that happen outside of Oregon City would be tremendously helpful. You've heard that, but I have to say it again because I need to know that the county is hearing this, because that is critical to us being able to be the best partners and the partners we want to be in supporting our houseless community members and in supporting the county and making this really work.
Thank you. Ed.
I almost hesitate to say this. I'm within 20 pages of finishing an excellent book on this subject called Tent City Urbanism. And it covers the entire history of tent cities, starting from the very, very basic unorganized city to the organizations which currently exist in Eugene. Much of the preconceptions I had going into this changed in the last couple of weeks as I've been reading this book. Unfortunately, it's around 220 pages, and I'm not sure that any of you want to spend that much time in reading the book, but it is excellent. It really covers the needs of the various cities and the way they grow up, starting from the unorganized tent city and ending up with the tiny house and the somewhat larger houses that you know of in Eugene, which exists now, Trent. I really think it would be an eye-opener for most of you if you or someone on your staff could get that book and read it. It is written by the person who has been responsible for much of what has happened in Eugene. It's called, again, Tent City Urbanism. And it has changed my mind dramatically on what is needed to make one of these cities successful.
Thank you, Ed. Councilor Lewis.
I'll start by saying I apologize for having an opinion, even though I was not at this meeting last month. So I'm speaking a little blindly to what was conversed about then. And to add to Ed's reading list, I would say the PSU report that came out about 2 weeks ago is probably a shorter read, but definitely speaks to some of the things that are necessary ingredients for sustained community of folks living in either pods or tent villages. My hope would be that we could have some conversation that really highlights how to work through barriers, because every single project will have a siting challenge, be it neighbors, be it ecological, be it, whatever kind of logistical. And how do you push through that? Say that not as, Metro with our SHS dollars. I say that as Metro, who's been working with the city of Portland for over a year on the expo site, and we hit wall after wall after wall, and not even throwing money at the problem fixes it sometimes. We're still trying, we're still working, but if we could have folks who have had success after hitting barriers speak to how they worked through those, that's where I think we have some real opportunity.
Yep. Thank you, Counselor. I was just say that a lot of the barriers that you mentioned, one of them, that there's often political as well, or sometimes all the above becomes under the umbrella of political. Depends how you really want to look at it. I do know that there was a sweet spot in a point in time in Clackamas County where, it was kind of given the reins, working with alongside Commissioner Schrader to work on the Veterans Village. And that was a unique opportunity. And it just seemed that it went so well and it worked out so well that we could just do number two. But number two, it's just the political barriers just exist. And it's challenging. But we'll get there. We have to. We have a demand out there, and unfortunately things aren't getting any better. The point in time count, I guess the initial, I haven't seen no one's seen the final study yet that I'm aware of, but it looks like the numbers in Clackamas County may be lower. The numbers in Multnomah County are higher, but I think everyone mutually agrees that they're both undercounted, that the situation is far worse. But everyone on the street who works this, whether it's law enforcement, emergency responders, seem to universally say that it's getting worse. So, we have the responsibility, frankly, to step up. And so we'll appreciate the conversation. I think the idea about going to Eugene, I have family there. I've been following it for a long time and was very inspired when I first went down there many, many years ago. And I can say that there's virtually most every model is down there, essentially, that we can build out of. The easiest one to stand up that there's the demand for, we don't seem to have here in the county, is car camping. There are people that are not going to move into, there's certain people that are not going to move into or under a roof anytime soon until they can actually transition. And there was a great piece tonight, I think it was KGW or Channel 8, and several, there's just a lot of studies on that not all people are ready to go from a tent to a roof. And we got to acknowledge that, and we need that transitional piece to get there. So it really, I'm coining someone else's phrase here. I was watching and been researching this. They want to turn the housing first model on its head and I think it's really somewhere in between. I'm not saying any one side's right, but I think it's somewhere in between. We just got to realize that some people do need to be immediately housed and can be immediately housed where some cannot. Lots said. I want to keep us all on time. We're quite past. So any other comments on this? So maybe some ideas about Trent, it seems like there's some people, some of us probably kind of like the idea about going to Eugene. That will probably be summertime, obviously, or I'm not sure. Maybe we can throw on some dates. And then maybe we can actually gather up a list of the different types that might help this conversation. There's different types of models that are down there in Eugene that we can look at and talk about that help in that transition from the tent cities all the way into wet facilities for drug alcohol treatment and so forth. So there's a number of things they have down there. They've done a great job. I don't know where they got the resources to do it all, but I tasked our staff with finding out the answer to that question. So thank you all for that. And to get us back on track, Jpec impact updates. So who would like to go first? Councilor Heisey, I'll put you on the spot.
You could tell that I was flipping through my notes and going, where is last month's Jpec meeting? I haven't found my notes yet.
Okay, I can push off to Mayor Buck and he can talk about them.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Thank you.
But don't worry, Councilor Heisey, I'll leave anything related to the RTP to you. Okay.
Aw, you're too kind.
So really at the last MPAC meeting, we had the kind of update from DLCD on the climate-friendly, equitable communities rulemaking. you know, obviously that work's been going on for like years, I guess. But this month here in a couple weeks, you know, they're going to find out. I don't know if they still have the final rules. So obviously it's a crunch, I know, for our city, not knowing exactly what the final rules are. But, you know, we the cities I've heard from the team in LO, they've been really appreciative of Margie at Metro. You know, she's been serving on the RAC and has been really involving the other, you know, technical staff in the jurisdictions throughout the metro area, and they've been very successful in some gains, you know, for metro area cities, especially those of us that have the metro designated town centers already. But obviously, this related to parking, land use, density, primarily, and then transportation planning. But that's where we get a little bit of a pass compared to the other communities in other parts of Oregon, outside the metro, this metro area. And then we also, what's the other big, we had a garbage and recycling systems update, including a Ridwell update, which, you know, has been a thing. So Metro is is licensing the Ridwell facility. And then, of course, I think that's up to local jurisdictions then in terms of, you know, how Ridwell operates locally in particular jurisdiction. That was pretty much it. We did have Councilor Lewis did have kind of the really good, interesting update on mid-cycle review, Tualatin, Tigard. So we'll be looking at that. Be a good discussion later in this month about how that mid-cycle review is or is not working, and that's pretty much it. But if Councilor Sherman, if I missed anything,
I think that was probably the big one was the UGB potential for a land swap with that 500 acres in Tigard versus some other undetermined location. I think the Metro COO had kind of put the unofficial stamp of approval on that. So that'll kind of start that research process. And I think you're right. That is about it. Waste facility planning. And of course, transportation. Councilor Heisey.
Like I'm the only person here who can talk about transportation. So we did talk about transportation at Jpec, shocking. We did spend a lot of time on the RTP, and in that conversation, it was really just looking at how is the public engagement going to go. And this is the exact same presentation those of us who attend C4 Metro had in the morning the day before. So I can go into it more for anyone who was not present at that, but I'll assume that you're okay with that. We had another update on increase from the Investment and Jobs Act for the regional flexible fund allocations. And that money it's going into the Surface Transportation Block Grant, Transportation Alternatives Program, and a little bit of money for the congestion management and air quality folks. And there wasn't really any controversy around that. That was something that Jpec had recommended. So we were all set there. And there was a little bit of a very short conversation about the UPWP review and discussion, and looking at Jpec's recommendation for that. That's Unified Work Planning Program at the federal level. But I think the most interesting thing in that later portion of the meeting was a presentation on the TV highway project. And this one is, I think, pretty cool. They had some money from a HOPE grant, which is a new grant resource that's available to do, actually very relevant to the research that we just heard about, how to really do community-based investigation into what needs to happen along this very busy corridor that is pretty uniquely used by quite a few folks who don't have cars. And how do you make rapid bus transit work, since rapid usually is dependent on having a reduced number of stops, and you've got a lot of riders who do need to just go one stop. And how do you include those folks in the greater process of planning about I think it was a 3-mile stretch of that really busy, congested corridor. It's pretty cool what they're doing. And it's work that could easily, I think, translate to 99. Parts of 99 are almost identical in some ways. The demographics are a little different, but it's really applicable. So I think it's a project that is worth keeping an eye on as we're thinking about some of our more congested and diversely used corridors in Clackamas County. Commissioner Savas, would you like to add anything after making me first?
Well, actually, I was going to ask Trent. Trent said earlier that he had a 205 update. So before we go off of transportation, I'd like to hear his update.
Thank you. Yeah, so, and this is related to Jpec in a way, which is that, let me get to my notes that I made for myself. Thank you. So the I-205 RTP amendment has been approved by Metro. That happened a couple weeks ago, I think just after the C4 Metro subcommittee meeting. So that's news to this group since the last time that a body of C4 has met. Also, since C4 has met in any capacity, that is that the OTC has approved the cost adjustment to the phase 1 part of the project. So that I think we've updated y'all, sporadically on this, that the cost estimates for phase 1 came in $120 or so million over the projected cost of the project. That's done a really good job of negotiating the cost down, which we found out after the approval at Metro. But that has also been, now that cost adjustment has been approved by the OTC, which means that Jpec coming up, there will be a decision to amend the STIP to include that cost adjustment. So that's a thing that's coming y'all's way, at least at the Jpec table. In addition to those sort of decision points, another decision and opportunity that we have just learned about this week is that ODOT has just given the green light to pursue an Infra grant for I-205. So we've learned, this is good news, but it's complicated news. So I'm going to share what I can because it's all happening really, really fast. They're going to pursue 3 grants. One of them is in Central Oregon that would be competitive with the I-205 project that they're also applying for. So they're hedging their bets. And there's another grant that's not competitive. That's in a different category of funding. So I don't remember what it's called because it wasn't competitive and it wasn't in Clackamas County. So I'll put it over there in my brain. They're going to apply for $120 million. That number sounds very similar to the number I just said. But what we've heard is that they want to focus the Infra grant on phase 2 specifically. So not on phase 1, not on the bridge. They want to focus on phase 2. So what that means for us is the lanes. I'm going to say it just a different way. Phase 2 is the lanes. And I think that that's just me being your C4 staff. I think that's very significant because the state and the region really is prioritizing the bridge. The state and the region has sort of shifted its politics, not very supportive of lanes. So I-205, thinking about the lanes and thinking about funding for the lanes is a good thing for Clackamas County because Clackamas County as a group in general has been supportive of removing the bottleneck. That's adding that 3rd lane to a highway that has 3rd lanes, only 3 lanes, except for this one part of the highway. So that's a really big deal because it advances a part of the project that doesn't quite have the same regional support as the bridge. And I want to put that on the table. At the same time, ODOT's being very clear in their application that tolling is a part of their financing tool. So it just is, right? That's what they've been directed to do. So that's just the beans, I guess, that are out there. They need support to get this grant across the finish line. That means support from the congressional delegation, who will probably be looking to each of y'all for y'all support. And each of y'all then have to make a decision on how you want to support this grant or not, which is going to be about the lanes, but we'll also notate that tolling is part of their funding model. I want to add that everybody in Clackamas County has been asking from the beginning to diversify the funding of the I-205 project. $120 million of federal grant dollars diversifies the funding. It means that the whole project will not be funded solely on tolls. ODOT has not been able to give us a commitment that this grant will lower toll rates because number one, they just determined this week that they're going to do this. And number two, they haven't set toll rates. And number three, again, they're scrambling. So just reiterating that this is all really new to them. It's really far ahead of everything. And there's just so many things that are moving pieces, inflation, there's a lot. I'm telling you what I know. So in the past, we've done big support letters like logo collections, but there's really not time, I think, to do a rally like that. So they need these support letters by May 20, it's like 3 weeks, super fast. And I think because of the complication of that tolling language, I don't know if it is feasible to do, where we'd have to get like wrapped up in some of the language on how we support this. And that's a decision that even our board hasn't necessarily made yet. But we're going to be working with our own board on how to have this conversation. If it's possible to thread the needle, I think, again, in general, we're all supportive of the lanes because it helps with flow traffic. It removes the actual bottleneck. It diversifies the funding, which we've all been consistent in asking for that type of flexibility in funding. Really, I think that there's a lot of net positives if this funding comes through. So I think in general, we'll be supportive. And we'll need to be very careful about how that language is going, but I can't say that officially because our board hasn't made that determination yet. But what we're going to do is draft some language. I'm also going to draft maybe some template letters and try to just share those with this group. Not to say do or don't, but just so that you have them and you can support those or not as you will. But it's a decision I think each of y'all need to make. And of course, this body can make its own decision as well if y'all want to support that as a C4 group. But this is the information as I have it. It's all coming really fast this week. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but just know that I might not be able to answer them.
Okay,
there you go.
Thank you, Trent. I just want to I'm sure you all have your constituents reaching out to you about this topic. I am constantly getting peppered with what's ODOT committed to us doing, what's the mitigation, what's the part that's not in this conversation that you had just now, Trent, is the diversion or mitigation or solutions to diversion. That's a big, big deal. And if it's just the lanes and tolling and not much of anything else, and it doesn't alleviate any of the concerns or give me any of the avenues to answer any of the questions, because all I can tell people is, no, ODOT hasn't made a commitment that way. No, we don't know. I don't know. So I do know, I'm going to give Councilor Lewis a little bit. I do know that there's a written agreement that they approved last Tuesday. Councilor Lewis, you want to help us out with that a little bit?
Sure. The written agreement is a letter between Chris Strickler, ODOT Director, and Metro Council President Lynn Peterson. It was signed after the vote, and it is, I don't have it up in front of me, but it's several parts. One piece is what we were calling the Sherman Amendment. So that is the assurance that if we pay off the bonds for the bridge and the tolling in the rest of the region is not stood up, we will turn tolling off in the 2 locations here on 205. It's also a firm commitment that there will be an equity program in place, AKA some sort of low income rate setting, and that will be determined through the equity process that's already statewide. So that's kind of the tone and tenor of the letter, is just the kind of conditions of approval, if you will. There is a commitment, obviously, through the language of the revised RTP amendments that do include the fact that there will be monies from the toll used to pay for local diversionary impact. And we have raised time and time again, how are you going to make the decision which diversionary impact and how much, and how are you going to basically make sure that both or all communities are made whole, and we're not pitting Oregon City versus Westland versus the non-cities. And so we did not have a committee structure that could be agreed to. ODOT kept making stuff up and it collapsed under its own weight. But there is a commitment to including local voices in future decision making. I will send the letter to Trent, who will then send it to everyone, because I don't know if I can replicate this email list. But yes, I will get that letter to Trent tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you, Councilor. Next up, climate action, Councilor Pratt.
We're not meeting right now. They're the consulting group is going out and doing community engagement, and then we will be meeting again. Well, it was supposed to be in the spring, but I think it's going to be the summer from the looks of it.
Okay, great, thank you. Trent, supportive housing services dollars update.
So my apologies, I don't have that information. I will email it when I email the letter that Councilor Lewis has talked about. But on the climate action plan, I do have an update because internally we've been having some conversations about community engagement. That's with the project team, recognizing some of the delays in meetings that Councilor Pratt just referenced. Actually, one of the primary ways that they want to pursue that is to make sure that there's robust engagement with our elected officials. And they've asked me many times, is C4 a possible table where that could happen? So this is me asking you, is that something you'd like me to work with the executive committee on to put on your agenda? Great, thank you. I'll make it so.
Do you want to add something, Councilor?
Just a plug for if the executive committee could also think about at that same time, getting at least a brief presentation from TriMet on their climate action plan, since that's kind of the intersection of climate and transportation. I think that would be pretty cool.
Okay. Thank you. What do we have next? Fireworks ban update. I'm happy to tell you that the Board of Commissioners, at least for now, has decided to not ban fireworks. I did ask that we reconsider that if something comes up in the next 30 days or more that is relevant to it, fire hazards, drought conditions, or something from our fire agencies. So we'll keep you posted on that. But as of now, there's no fireworks ban in the works. And last but not least, is there any other business? Mayor Hodson, you had your hand up.
I was just going to seek clarification on the fireworks piece. So when the about banning fireworks, are we talking about all fireworks, or are we talking about the banning what are considered already the illegal banned fireworks? Like, what's the component of that that's being discussed?
I believe the context, we had some of the fire district chiefs come to us, I believe Canby as well, and I believe, and or representing the consortium of those groups. And the idea was about the legal fireworks, banning the legal fireworks, or essentially banning fireworks and say there shall not be. And I will say what I shared when they came before the BCC here a couple of weeks ago, that granted there were a lot of fireworks, illegal fireworks being shot off on July 4th. It was a lot less than the years prior. So I think a lot of people did step up, and there was a reduction in people lighting off fireworks. But that's about it. So if we did do a ban, I think we would get some help. And I'm hoping maybe people are more conscientious right now about looking at their fire lines around their property, about any trees or dry brush, and maybe thinking about ways to strengthen their fire lines, if you will, for fire breaks, if you will, around their property, for lack of a better term. But that applies to rural and urban. And I think sometimes we get lost and it's all a rural problem. But if you look what happened in Denver, or in Colorado, that is, in Colorado, a couple fires, and what's going on in the rest of the western part of the country, some of these things are racing right through suburban areas. So we're not invincible, very clearly.
I want to just add on top of that, while the board did make that decision, they have also authorized us to move forward with a robust public engagement communications campaign. And so you please follow us on social media, Facebook or Instagram, and share some of that information, because that will be helpful. Knowledge is power in some of those elements. And so, yes, can you do it? Yes. Are there safe ways to do it? And so we're going to be trying to tackle some of that, because the intent of this conversation, like last year, was around expected dry seasons. And we've already heard from state wildfire officials that it's, even though it's dumping rain right now and it's going to be pouring rain on my kid's 4th birthday on Saturday here this spring, it's still a dry season, and we're expecting a dry season through the summer. So that's why we're going to take this more education-based approach. And if if, I think I heard the board say this, correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, if it's getting towards that July, 4th timeline and conditions are looking increasingly negative, the board has offered to reconsider that conversation. But for now, it's education and no ban.
Yeah. And the only other little thing I'll add to this is just my insight. My sense was that there was more reluctance on the fire district side to take action than there was on the Board of County Commissioners. And what I mean by that, I just sense, this is just my intuition, maybe Commissioner Scholl, if he's still with us, might want to comment, but I sense that if the fire district folks said, put a ban in place or asked us to put a ban in place, my guess is we probably would have done it. Martin.
Just real quick, I just want to point out that out in the rural areas, the problem is not legal fireworks. The problem is illegal fireworks. It's the ones that go up 50 feet in the air and explode. I have it on several sides of me, and it's a huge problem out here for the animals and everybody else. So in that education process, I would request that you draw a very bright line between what is legal, which are sparklers and things like that, versus M80s and things that blow up in the air. Because that's the biggest problem out here. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a decades old problem are the illegal fireworks, and what are we really doing to curb it? And what can we do to curb it other than declare it's not legal? I think it's the enforcement action that's the difficult piece. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Pardon? Anything else for the good of the order? Y'all have a safe drive home. Thank you so much. Good night.